Little boy begged Hell's Angels to be his dad for a day. What happened next will leave you speechless. Will you be my dad for one day? The words hung in the air like a ticking time bomb in the Iron Stallion clubhouse. Marcus, an 8-year-old boy with a black eye and dirt-streaked clothes, stood in the doorway clutching a hand-drawn invitation to career day at Roosevelt Elementary. Above him, the Hells Angels winged skull logo loomed on the wall. 12 Hells Angels members froze mid-conversation, their eyes locked on the boy. Bull, the club's sergeant-at-arms, was the first to break the silence. "Kid, how'd you even get in here?" Bull asked, his voice gruff. "I walked," Marcus replied, his tone matter-of-fact. 3 miles from school. "Where are your parents?" Diesel, the club president, asked, his gaze hardening. Marcus's lip quivered. "My mom works 2 jobs. My real dad died when I was 4. And my stepdad." He touched his black eye, his voice faltering. "He doesn't count." The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Every man in the clubhouse knew exactly what that gesture meant. "Why do you need a dad for one day?" Diesel asked, his voice softening as he knelt to meet the boy's gaze. "It's career day on Friday," Marcus explained, his voice trembling. "Everyone's bringing their dads to talk about their jobs, but I can't bring my stepdad." He paused, struggling to hold back tears. Because the bullies already know he's mean. They say I'm worthless, just like him. They say nobody would want to be my dad, even for pretend." "Who are these bullies?" Bull's voice was low, dangerous. "Trent Morrison and his friends," Marcus replied, his eyes downcast. "They push me down every day. They've stolen my lunch money 12 times. Yesterday they locked me in the bathroom during recess." Marcus wiped his eyes. "But if I had a dad show up, someone really cool, maybe they'd leave me alone." Snake, the youngest member, snickered darkly. "Kid picked us 'cause we look scary." Marcus shook his head, his voice steady. "No, I picked you because my mom says bikers are loyal. She says if a biker is your friend, he's your friend forever. I need a forever friend." The room fell into a heavy silence. Diesel stood up slowly, his gaze never leaving Marcus. "What time does career day start?" "Anchor Friday morning," Marcus replied, hope flickering in his eyes. "We'll be there," Diesel said firmly. Marcus's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? But you've got to promise me something." Diesel's voice grew serious. "You tell me the truth about that black eye. Did your stepdad do that?" Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze dropping. "A couple times a week, when mom's at her night job." The bikers exchanged looks, sharp, calculating, and laced with unspoken fury. These were men who'd done time, who'd lived hard lives, but even they had lines they wouldn't cross. Hurting kids was the worst kind of line. "We're going to need more information," Bull said, his voice low but urgent. "What's your stepdad's name?" "Derek," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "Vance, he works at the auto parts store on 5th Street. Recognition flickered across several faces. "I know that guy," Wrench muttered. "He's got a gambling problem. Owes money all over town. That's why my mom has to work so much," Marcus added softly, "to pay his debts." Diesel's eyes hardened, his voice steady. "Listen to me carefully, kid. We're going to help you, but not the way you might think. First rule, we don't become what we're fighting against. Understand?" Marcus nodded, though the full weight of Diesel's words hadn't quite sunk in yet. Friday morning arrived. Marcus stood outside Roosevelt Elementary at 8:45 a.m., nervously glancing at his watch every 30 seconds. Other kids began to arrive with their parents. Trent Morrison showed up first, walking in beside his dad. Tall, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying himself like he owned the world. He worked as a real estate developer. Trent spotted Marcus standing alone and couldn't hide the smirk that spread across his face. "Where's your dad, loser?" he taunted. "Oh, wait, you don't have one." Trent's friends joined in, laughing on cue. Marcus felt his eyes burn, but he refused to cry. He had cried enough. Just as the weight of their words began to settle in, he heard it, the roar of motorcycles. The rumble of engines grew louder. 20 motorcycles turned the corner in perfect formation, their roar like rolling thunder. Parents stopped in their tracks. Teachers peered out the windows. The principal stepped outside, eyes wide in disbelief. The bike slid into the parking lot in a perfect V formation and shut off in flawless unison. 20 bikers dismounted, all wearing their club patches. They ranged from Bull, a towering 6'4" and 300 pounds, to Ghost, whose tattoos seemed to cover every inch of visible skin. Diesel walked straight to Marcus, his presence commanding. "Sorry we're late, son," he said with a grin. "Traffic was hell." "Rough," Diesel added with a smirk. Marcus's face lit up, breaking into the biggest smile anyone at the school had ever seen. Trent Morrison's jaw dropped and his father instinctively took a step back. "Mr. Diesel," the principal stammered, approaching cautiously. "I'm Principal Chen. We weren't exactly expecting quite so many visitors." Marcus's smile grew even wider. "My boy said it was career day," Diesel replied smoothly. "Thought we'd bring the whole crew. We run a motorcycle club and a repair shop. Figured we could talk about mechanics, brotherhood, and community service." "Community service?" Principal Chen's voice faltered, his eyes darting between Diesel and the intimidating group of bikers. Principal Chen looked skeptical, raising an eyebrow. "We do toy drives every Christmas, food drives for homeless shelters, and escort services for abused women who need safe transport to shelters," Diesel continued, his tone calm and confident. Diesel then pulled out a surprisingly professional business card and handed it over. "We're also licensed and insured, ma'am. Everything legal." The principal's expression softened ever so slightly. "Well, I suppose that would be educational." The career day presentation quickly became legendary. 20 bikers filled the gymnasium, their presence commanding attention. They brought their bikes inside, revving engines and giving the kids a chance to sit on the bikes, feeling the power and history of the club. The energy in the room was electric. The kids eagerly gathered around, eyes wide, taking in the sight of the bikes. They listened intently as the bikers spoke about engine repair, leather crafting, and the importance of loyalty. But the most powerful moment came when Bull stood up to share his story. "I grew up like some of you," he began, his gaze landing squarely on Marcus. "I had a stepdad who hurt me, made me feel small, made me believe I was worthless." His voice echoed through the silent gym, every word heavy with emotion. "But I learned something important," Bull continued, his tone firm. "That man was wrong. I wasn't worthless. None of you are worthless," and he paused, his eyes scanning the room. "And if anyone ever tells you different, if anyone ever tries to make you feel less than what you are, you stand tall and remember, they're the ones who are wrong. If anyone hurts you, you need to tell someone," Bull said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "A teacher, a cop, a biker in a bar, someone who can help." Several kids were wiping their eyes, and even some teachers had tears in their eyes. The weight of Bull's words hung heavy in the gym, leaving a profound impact on everyone present. At lunch, Trent Morrison approached Marcus, his posse of friends trailing behind him. "Your dad's just a criminal pretending to be something he's not," Trent sneered. Before Marcus could respond, Trent's father appeared, his voice sharp and angry. "Son, let's go." "But Dad, now?" Trent protested. The man grabbed Trent's arm, yanking him roughly, making the boy wince in pain. Diesel noticed, his eyes narrowing as he saw the grip. So did 5 other bikers. Diesel muttered under his breath, his gaze locked on Trent's father. The room seemed to hold its breath as the tension between the two men escalated. "Morrison?" Diesel called out, his voice calm but commanding. "Got a minute?" "I'm busy," Trent's father snapped. But something in Diesel's tone made him stop in his tracks. "Make time," Diesel insisted. The two men walked to a quiet corner, their conversation a low murmur. The other bikers, in their usual way, casually formed a perimeter, their eyes scanning the room, ensuring no one interfered. Nobody heard what was said, but when Trent's father left the school, he looked pale and shaken, his steps unsteady. Trent stood off to the side, looking both confused and oddly relieved. Later, when asked about the exchange, Diesel simply shrugged and said, "We had a conversation about parenting techniques. He's going to work on improving his approach." What really happened in that corner, though, remained a mystery, one that would stay with Trent's father long after he left the school. What really happened was simpler. Diesel had recognized the signs. Trent wasn't a bully because he was bad. He was a bully because he was being abused at home and taking it out on weaker kids. The cycle of pain was repeating. Your son's hurting people because someone's hurting him, Diesel had said quietly, his voice firm but calm. Get help, or we'll help you understand why that's unacceptable. Your choice. Trent's father, shaken, chose help. That afternoon, anonymous calls were made to social services, but the real problem was still Marcus. While Trent's situation was being addressed, Marcus's pain was something the bikers couldn't fix with a few words or actions. The deeper wounds, the ones that couldn't be seen, were still there. That night, Derek Vance came home drunk and furious. He'd heard about the bikers at Marcus's school, and his pride was bruised. He didn't like being embarrassed. You think you're tough now? Derek sneered, grabbing Marcus by the shirt. Think some bikers are going to protect you? Marcus's mom stepped forward, trying to intervene, but Derek shoved her against the wall, causing her to cry out. That's when the front door swung open. 4 bikers walked in like they owned the place. Bull, Snake, Wrench, and Ghost. How'd you get in my house? Derek snarled, his anger flaring. Door was unlocked, Bull said calmly, as if he'd done nothing more than walk into a friend's house. Safety hazard, Bull said, his tone eerily calm. You should be more careful. Derek, his face contorted with rage, reached for a baseball bat. The 4 bikers didn't flinch. You're going to want to rethink that, Snake said, his voice cool and steady. Get out before I call the cops, Derek spat, trying to bluff his way out. Please. Do, Ghost replied, pulling out his phone with a smile. I've got them on speed dial. Let's tell them about those bruises on your stepson and your wife, and maybe about that warrant for unpaid child support from your first marriage. Derek's face drained of color, his mouth going dry. How do you? We do our research, Bull said, stepping forward with an intimidating calm. Bull stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice low and steady. You're going to pack a bag. You're going to leave. You're going to sign those divorce papers. And you're going to disappear from these people's lives forever. Derek's eyes narrowed, a sneer curling on his lips. And if I don't? The 4 bikers smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Then we'll explain to your bookie why you can't pay your gambling debts anymore, Snake said, his voice dripping with menace. Word is you owe Big Tommy 15 grand. Big Tommy doesn't like people who can't pay. Derek's hands began to shake, his bravado crumbling. You wouldn't try? Bull interrupted, his gaze hardening. Try us. Derek packed his bags and left that night. The divorce papers were signed within a month. He violated the restraining order exactly once. He woke up the next morning in his car, which had somehow ended up in a junkyard 50 miles away. He never came back. Marcus's mom found a new job through a connection Bull had at a friend's construction company. It came with better pay, better hours, and benefits, everything she needed to start fresh. Trent Morrison stopped bullying people. His father, after being confronted by Diesel, entered therapy and anger management. The cycle was breaking. For the first time in a long while, things began to look up. Career Day became an annual tradition. The bikers returned each year to talk about respect, loyalty, and standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. 5 years later, Marcus stood in that same gymnasium, now 13 years old and captain of the wrestling team. He wasn't the scared little kid anymore. Diesel sat in the front row, his gaze steady and proud, watching Marcus give a speech about overcoming adversity. Family isn't who shares your blood, Marcus said, his voice strong. Family is who shows up when you're scared and makes you feel like you're never alone. The room fell silent, the weight of his words resonating deeply with everyone there. Safe, family is who sees you at your worst and decides to stick around anyway. Marcus's gaze landed on Diesel, who sat in the front row, a proud smile playing on his face. My dad died when I was 4, but I got 20 new ones when I was 8. He paused, his voice growing stronger. And they taught me the most important lesson. Real strength isn't about being the toughest or the scariest. Real strength is choosing to protect instead of destroy. The gymnasium erupted in applause, the sound deafening. Diesel wiped his eyes quickly, trying to pretend he wasn't crying. Bull punched him on the shoulder with a grin. You did good, old man, he said, his voice thick with pride. We all did. We did, Diesel said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We all did. Sometimes the most broken people make the best healers because they remember what it felt like to hurt. And sometimes a little boy asking for just one day of pretend becomes the foundation for a lifetime of real family. He looked out at the crowd, his voice softening. Thank you for being part of this journey. Please click the subscribe button and support our channel, Bikershype. Your support helps us share more stories of hope, healing, and heroism.